I've been driving a tow truck for Greenwood Towing for nearly 4 years now, mostly on the night shift. The night work pays better, and I've always been a bit of a night owl anyway, so it made sense to switch over after a while. The silence of the roads after midnight, the cool air, and that odd stillness that settles over the city and the outskirts is something I've grown used to. It has its perks: less traffic, fewer impatient drivers, and the occasional quiet moment to catch a breath. But it also comes with its own set of challenges. Most nights, my calls are pretty routine: broken down cars on the side of the highway, fender benders in poorly lit intersections, or the occasional drunk driver who needs a ride home and a tow for their vehicle. I've seen it all, from dead batteries and flat tires to minor collisions where tempers flare, but no one's seriously hurt. Those calls are the bread and butter of my job, and I've gotten good at reading situations quickly, working efficiently, and keeping my cool no matter what time I'm called out. There are nights that stand out though, moments that feel just a little off from the usual grind. Like the time I had to haul a semi-truck out of the mud near Pine Ridge. The driver was a grizzled, old guy who swore the truck got sucked in by the ground, and it took me hours to get the rig back on solid footing. That job left me soaked through with sweat and mud, but it was a good challenge, the kind you don't forget. Another time, I got a call to pick up a car that had been abandoned in a no-parking zone downtown. No owner in sight, no clue how it got there or why it was just left on the curb. The car was clean, like it was waiting for someone, but no one ever showed up. I towed it back to the lot, but the whole thing gave me an uneasy feeling. Sometimes, those little weird jobs stick with you more than the usual stuff. Working nights means you have to stay sharp. Fatigue is a constant enemy, and it's easy to let your guard down when the roads are empty and the radio is just static between calls. I've learned not to get too caught up in the strange stories you hear from clients or the rumors that float around about certain stretches of road. You have to keep your head clear, focus on the job, and not let your imagination run wild. But that's easier said than done when you spend hours alone in a cab, cruising down dark highways with only the glow of your dash lights and the occasional flicker from a passing headlight. Greenwood Towing isn't a huge company, but it's reliable. The dispatchers know me by name, and I've built a decent reputation for being dependable and quick. I usually roll out in my old Ford tow rig. Nothing fancy, but it gets the job done. The truck's seen better days, but it's solid and familiar, which matters when you're working nights and everything else feels uncertain. The nights themselves are long, and the calls can come at any time. Sometimes, you'll get a quiet stretch with nothing but a few passing cars. Other times, it's back-to-back, a fender bender here, a stalled engine there. You never really know what you're going to run into, and that unpredictability is part of the job's appeal, even if it's also a source of stress. Most nights, I keep the radio tuned to the local police scanner just to stay in the loop. It helps me anticipate where I might be needed next, or if there's something I should be cautious about. Occasionally, you hear about things that don't quite add up: missing persons reports, strange noises, or unexplained sightings. But those are usually the kind of stories that don't reach the tow truck driver's ears in a way that feels immediate. They're distant, like background noise to the real work. I've come to appreciate the quiet moments too. There's something about driving through empty streets or along dark country roads where the only light is from my truck's headlights that feels almost meditative. It's a chance to clear your mind, think about life, or just zone out for a bit. But even then, there's a part of you that stays alert, listening for anything out of the ordinary. After all, when you're alone on a lonely road at 3 a.m., the silence can be as unsettling as the noise. The job has taught me patience and a kind of respect for the unexpected. You learn to expect the unexpected, if that makes any sense. Whether it's a car that's been in an accident or something stranger, you have to be ready to handle whatever comes your way. Sometimes, that means dealing with frustrated drivers. Other times, it means dealing with the unknown. I don't have any illusions about this being a glamorous job. It's hard, and it's often thankless. But there's a satisfaction in helping people when they're stuck, and getting them back on the road safely. It's a job that requires a steady hand, a clear head, and a willingness to face whatever the night throws at you. So, I keep my gear ready, my truck maintained, and my eyes peeled. I know that the next call could be just another routine tow, or it could be something that shakes me in ways I don't expect. That's the nature of the night shift at Greenwood Towing: quiet, lonely, and sometimes a little bit strange. But I wouldn't have it any other way. Around 3 a.m., Just as I was starting to feel the weight of the long night settling in, my radio crackled with a new call. The dispatcher's voice was clipped and low, probably because she'd been up just as long as I had. Got a vehicle stranded on Hollow Hill Road. Driver's not responding. You're close, right? I confirmed, already grabbing my keys and sliding into the cab. Hollow Hill Road is one of those stretches nobody really wants to drive at night unless they have to. It's a narrow two-lane winding through dense woods, with barely any streetlights scattered here and there like afterthoughts. Cell service is patchy at best, and locals tend to avoid it after dark. There are stories about strange noises and odd disappearances, but I'd never seen anything firsthand. It just had that kind of reputation you can't shake. The drive out there was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears after a while. The trees stood tall on both sides, their branches intertwining overhead, casting long shadows in the beam of my headlights. I kept the radio on low, listening for anything unusual, but all I could hear were distant coyotes and the hum of my engine. When I pulled onto Hollow Hill Road, the usual silence felt thicker, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. After a few miles, I spotted the truck in question, a rusted, old pickup parked awkwardly on the shoulder. The engine was running, which was odd, but no one was behind the wheel. The cab's door was slightly ajar, and the headlights illuminated patches of the forest floor, casting eerie shapes that danced with the breeze. I killed my engine and grabbed the flashlight from the console before stepping out. The cold night air hit me, sharp and biting, and the crunch of leaves underfoot seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. I circled the truck, looking for any sign of the driver, but all I found was the faint scent of damp earth and something else, something musky and unfamiliar. As I leaned into the cab to check the interior, my radio crackled again, this time with a shaky voice that made my skin crawl. Hey, you need to get out of there. Now, something's watching from the trees. The voice was distorted, like it was coming from a walkie-talkie left on the seat or a scanner someone forgot to turn off. I froze for a moment, flashlight beams sweeping the dark woods just beyond the truck. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches shifting as if someone, or something, was moving just out of sight. My gut tightened, but I told myself it was probably a prank or a nervous passenger who'd fled the scene. Still, I didn't want to dismiss the warning outright. I checked the truck more carefully and noticed the door had scratch marks along the edge, deep enough to catch the light. The hood bore gouges that looked like claws had raked across the metal. These weren't fresh, but they were unsettling, like some large animal had taken a swipe at the vehicle. The air felt heavier now, the silence broken only by the distant rustling of leaves and a faint snapping of branches somewhere deeper in the forest. I kept my flashlight trained on the tree line, but nothing moved, just shadows and dark shapes that my mind tried to fill with figures. I reached for my phone to call dispatch, but the screen showed no signal. That patchy service I'd heard about was real, and out here, I was cut off. The radio crackled again, static mostly, but every now and then that same shaky voice whispered warnings I couldn't quite catch. I told myself to stay calm, keep my head clear, and finish the tow quickly. The truck needed to be hooked up and pulled out of the woods before whatever was out there decided to show itself. But as I started to connect the chains, that uneasy feeling clawed at me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the sense of eyes watching from just beyond the edge of the beam. I glanced back toward the trees, and for a brief second, thought I saw movement, a shadow slipping between trunks like something huge was pacing just out of sight. I shook it off, blaming fatigue and the play of light, but the doubt lingered. I kept working, trying not to let the fear take hold. The night had a way of messing with your senses, making you see things that weren't there. But this felt different. It felt like something real was out there, watching me, waiting. I didn't say anything over the radio again, just finished hooking the truck and climbed back into my cab. I kept the headlights on high beam, scanning the edges of the forest as I pulled the pickup out onto the road. The engine's rumble was a comfort, a reminder I was still in control, still in charge. But as I started to drive back, that distorted voice echoed in my mind, warning me to stay clear of those woods. Hollow Hill Road wasn't just a quiet, desolate stretch. It was a place where the night held secrets, and some of those secrets were watching from the trees. As I stepped out of the cab to take a closer look at that pickup, a chill ran down my spine. The night air felt heavier here, like the woods were holding their breath, waiting. I ran my flashlight over the truck's surface and immediately noticed the strange scratch marks along the driver's door. They weren't the usual dents or scrapes you'd expect from a careless driver. These were jagged, deep gouges, etched into the metal as if something large had clawed at it with considerable force. The paint was scraped down to bare metal in places, the edges bent inward slightly, like the truck had been grabbed and shaken. My breath caught when I moved around to the hood. There, the gouges were even more pronounced, long, deep scrapes that cut across the rusted surface in uneven lines. Whoever, or whatever, had made them had left no mistaking the size and strength behind those marks. It wasn't normal animal scratches, not from any deer or raccoon. These were big, deliberate, as though some creature was trying to get in or warn whoever was inside to back off. The woods around me were unervingly silent now. No rustling leaves, no whine through the branches, just a heavy, oppressive stillness that pressed in on every side. It felt like the forest itself was watching me. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness but revealing nothing but trunks and shadows. Then I noticed footprints in the muddy patch near the shoulder of the road, close to where the truck was parked. I crouched down to take a closer look, my flashlight steady despite the cold sweat on my palms. The prints were large, much larger than any human's shoe size, and oddly shaped. They didn't have the typical outline of a boot or sneaker. Instead, they were irregular, with deep impressions that looked almost like elongated toes or claws. The spacing between them suggested something tall and heavy had walked here recently. I traced the footprints back toward the tree line, but they stopped abruptly at the edge of the woods, as if whatever had made them melted into the darkness. I took a step back and suddenly felt exposed, like I'd crossed an invisible line into territory I wasn't supposed to be in. The silence was broken by the faint snap of a branch somewhere behind me. I whipped the flashlight around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. My ears strained to catch any other sounds, just the distant echo of my own breathing and the faint rustle of leaves shifting in the night breeze. Yet, that sound was unlike any breeze I'd heard before. It was deliberate, like footsteps or a slow, heavy movement through the underbrush. I swallowed hard, reminding myself not to jump to conclusions. Tow truck drivers see all sorts of strange things, and the mind can play tricks when you're alone in the dark. But this was different. My instincts screamed at me that something wasn't right. I felt watched, closely, patiently. I examined the truck once more, shining the beam through the windows. The interior was empty except for a small walkie-talkie resting on the passenger seat, its static crackling faintly. I picked it up, pressing the button to check if it was still on. A shaky voice whispered warnings a moment ago, and I wasn't eager to hear it again, but the static persisted. As I looked up, a flicker of movement caught my eye at the edge of the forest, just a shadow shifting between the trees. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and scanned the area, but the darkness swallowed whatever had been there. It was gone before I could get a clear look. The feeling of unease intensified. I couldn't shake the image of those massive footprints, the claw marks, or the shadowy figure slipping away into the blackness. Whatever had been here wasn't human, that much was clear. The question was, what was it? And why had it left the truck alone? I checked my watch. Time was running short if I wanted to get this tow done and be back before the early morning rush. Still, the urge to leave was growing stronger. The woods around Hollow Hill Road felt less like a backdrop and more like a living thing, watching, waiting. I decided to take one last look around before hooking up the truck. My flashlight beam swept over the muddy ground again, and that's when I noticed something else. Deep gouges in the earth, like massive claws had dug into the soil nearby. The marks were fresh. The mud was still wet and soft around the edges. The size was staggering, far beyond anything I'd seen before, and arranged in a pattern that suggested a large creature had been pacing or circling. A low growl echoed faintly from somewhere deeper in the woods, a sound that rattled my nerves and tightened the knot in my stomach. I froze, straining to pinpoint where it came from, but all I could see was the thick darkness between the trees. The radio on my truck crackled again, cutting through the silence with static and that same distorted voice warning me to leave. I didn't hesitate this time. My hands moved quickly, hooking the chains and securing the truck to the tow bar. The feeling of being watched didn't ease, and I kept glancing over my shoulder into the inky blackness. Just as I was about to climb back into the cab, my flashlight flickered and dimmed, then died, plunging me into near total darkness except for the faint glow of the truck's dashboard lights. I fumbled for a spare, my heart racing. From the woods came a guttural growl, low and primal, reverberating through the trees and shaking the quiet night. For a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing just beyond the tree line, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It was massive, towering, and vaguely humanoid, but covered in thick, dark fur. I slammed the flashlight on and climbed into the truck, locking the doors behind me. The creature stayed at the edge of the forest, its glowing eyes watching me as I started the engine. My hands trembled on the wheel as I pulled the truck free and sped away, stealing quick, nervous glances in the rearview mirror. Even as the trees gave way to open road and the creature's silhouette faded into the darkness, the image of those massive claw marks and irregular footprints lingered in my mind. Whatever was out there wasn't some wild animal. It was something else entirely, something big, something watching, and it had left unmistakable evidence of its presence. Just as I was finishing up hooking the old pickup to my tow rig, my tow light flickered and then cut out completely, plunging me into near darkness. The sudden loss of light made my skin crawl. I fumbled for the switch, twisting and clicking, but the bulb stayed dead. My heartbeat hammered in my ears as the oppressive silence around me thickened. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves and that low, guttural growl echoing from somewhere deep in the woods. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand, my eyes darting toward the tree line. Between the trunks, a shadowy figure emerged, its glowing eyes piercing the darkness. It was massive, easily over 7 feet tall, and covered in thick, dark fur that blended into the night. Its face was vaguely human but distorted, with deep-set eyes that seemed to study me, assessing every move. Long claws glistened faintly in the sparse light, and its heavy breathing rattled the air. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay still, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The creature didn't move closer. Instead, it lingered just at the edge of the forest, watching. The silence was broken only by its slow, deliberate growl, a sound that felt prehistoric, raw, and full of warning. I scrambled back into the cab, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands shook as I started the engine, eyes fixed on the creature's glowing gaze through the rear window. It pressed its enormous hand against the truck door, the sheer size of it dwarfing my whole arm. I could feel the pressure through the metal, a silent communication that was both terrifying and oddly curious. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was facing. This wasn't some wild animal or a prank. It was something else, something ancient and powerful. There was intelligence in those eyes, an awareness that unsettled me to my core. It didn't seem interested in harming me, but it was clearly watching, studying. I floored the accelerator, pulling the truck free and speeding down the road as fast as I dared. The creature remained where it stood, a dark sentinel framed by the trees, its gaze following me until I turned onto the main highway. Even then, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting it to follow, but it didn't move. When I finally reached the gas station at the edge of town, relief washed over me, though the adrenaline still thrummed through my veins. I parked under the harsh fluorescent lights, the bright glare making everything feel unreal. I sat there for a long time, catching my breath, my hands trembling on the wheel. The pickup was secured behind me, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about the creature's gaze, the way it had pressed its hand against my door, the deep scratches and claw marks on the rusted truck. It felt like a warning, or maybe an invitation to understand something beyond my grasp. I considered calling it in, reporting what I'd seen, but the fear of sounding crazy held me back. Who would believe a tow truck driver's story about a giant, hairy figure with glowing eyes lurking in the woods? I debated whether to mention the footprints, the gouges in the mud, the strange voice on the walkie-talkie. It was all too much, too unbelievable. The experience left me shaken and wary. I knew I'd be thinking about that night for a long time. Hollow Hill Road wasn't just another stretch of road with poor lighting and patchy cell service. It was a place where something unknown lived, something that watched and waited in the dark. I checked the truck for any new damage and noticed the scratches on my door had gotten worse, deeper than before. The metal was bent inward just like the pickups. I ran my fingers over the marks, feeling the cold, rough edges, a physical reminder that what I'd encountered was real. After that night, I called in sick for the rest of my shift, needing time to process what had happened. I avoided Hollow Hill Road altogether, sticking to better lit, busier routes where I could feel safer. When I did have to respond to calls in remote areas, I made sure to bring extra flashlights and never worked alone if I could help it. Even now, when I'm out on the road late at night, I catch myself glancing into the woods, half expecting to see those glowing eyes watching from the shadows. The encounter changed how I look at the night, at those quiet, lonely stretches of road where the darkness isn't just absence of light. It's something alive, something waiting. I don't know what that creature wanted that night. Maybe it was curious, more interested in observing than attacking. But the handprint on my truck door and the scratches on the pickup tell a different story than the one I tell myself. That some things out there are beyond explanation, and they're watching us just as closely as we watch them. Since then, I've been more cautious, more respectful of the unknown. The job goes on, the calls keep coming, but there's a part of me that's never quite at ease on those remote roads. I've learned to trust that feeling, that instinct that warns me something's out there, just beyond the reach of my headlights, waiting and watching.